How do you become the richest man in the world and still be known as the cheapest? J. Paul Getty made his first million before most people finish college, and by the end of his life, he controlled one of the greatest oil empires in human history. But behind the billions was a man so frugal, he charged guests to use his phone, and once haggled over his own grandson's ransom. He wasn't born poor, but he wasn't born an oil baron either. J. Paul Getty was the son of a lawyer who'd tasted success in oil, just enough to inspire, not enough to inherit. At 23, Getty stood at a crossroads. Fresh out of Oxford and newly returned to America, he could have joined the family business, played it safe, worked his way up like everyone else. But safety didn't appeal to him. Risk did. Independence did. Legacy demanded it. So he borrowed $500 from his father, not a gift, not a trust fund. A loan. With it, he bought a lease on a dusty, half-forgotten oil tract in Oklahoma. The locals laughed. Others passed. But Getty saw black gold beneath the red dirt. For weeks, the drill bit spun through dry earth. Day after day, nothing. Then, one morning, it happened, a gusher. Crude oil exploded into the air like a dark promise. That $500 gamble turned into his first million within a year. But more than wealth, that strike gave him something far more valuable, a taste for what was possible. He didn't just hit oil. He hit purpose. He wasn't chasing comfort. He was chasing control. Not just over oil, but over destiny. Wealth came fast. Fame followed soon after. By his early 30s, J. Paul Getty was a millionaire several times over, with oil flowing, investments multiplying, and his name echoing through boardrooms from Los Angeles to London. But unlike the other tycoons of his era, Getty didn't throw extravagant parties or bathe in opulence. In fact, he counted every dollar like it might be his last. He wore tailored suits, often the same ones, and reused envelopes. When guests visited his estate, they were stunned to find a payphone installed in the hallway. If you wanted to call home, you'd better have change. He justified it by saying, "If I paid for every guest's call, I'd be broke in a month." He bargained hard, with waiters, with contractors, with billion-dollar partners. To Getty, frugality wasn't just a habit. It was a principle. Waste was weakness. Luxury was a distraction. Yet the world watched in confusion. How could a man worth hundreds of millions care so much about pennies? To some, it was admirable, discipline taken to the extreme. To others, it was cold, almost comical. And to Getty, it was simply logic. He once said, "$1 billion isn't what it used to be." He was a man who mastered the art of acquisition, but never stopped calculating the cost. Not just in dollars, but in perception. Because with every dollar he saved, something else was quietly spent: warmth, trust, and a little bit of humanity. By the late 1940s, Getty was already rich, but not yet untouchable. Oil was booming in America, but the fields were aging. Competition was fierce. Margins were thinning. The real prize was somewhere else. While others doubled down in Texas and California, Getty looked east, far east, to a barren stretch of desert in Saudi Arabia, where sandstorms choked the air and temperatures boiled steel. The land was unforgiving, the political risks immense, and the oil unproven. But Getty saw what others didn't: potential. In 1949, he made a move that many called reckless. He invested $9.5 million into a 60-year oil concession in the neutral zone between Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. The land was dry. The wells were silent. For years, nothing. People whispered that Getty had finally miscalculated, that his legendary frugality had met its match in the harsh desert heat. But Getty didn't flinch. He waited. He believed. Then in 1953, 4 years later, the desert roared. The oil struck was massive. Over 16 million barrels a year would flow from that single deal. It transformed Getty's fortune overnight. That one bet didn't just make him a billionaire, it made him a global force. He'd turned sand into power, risk into dominance, While others thought local, Getty thought planetary. Where others saw danger, he saw leverage. It wasn't luck. It was vision. And it's what separated the wealthy from the legendary. Getty never craved the spotlight, but his influence quietly circled the globe. While others flaunted their wealth, Getty worked in whispers. Behind closed doors, in long corridors of power, he was stitching together a network, a mosaic of oil fields, shipping routes, refineries, and legal agreements that spanned continents. He bought struggling companies, revived failing wells, and negotiated deals in multiple languages, all while remaining almost invisible to the public eye. He wasn't loud. He was effective. By the 1960s, Getty Oil had become one of the most powerful independent oil companies in the world. He controlled over 200 companies and operated in dozens of countries, all without ever bowing to the monopolies or governments that dominated the industry. He turned crude oil into clean contracts. He knew that power didn't lie in barrels, it lay in ownership, in leverage, in infrastructure. And unlike many of his peers, Getty didn't rely on Wall Street or headlines to grow. He reinvested relentlessly, kept operations lean, and used his legendary thrift to squeeze every drop of value from every deal. He was building not just wealth, but an empire. Quietly, strategically, relentlessly. While the world watched men like Rockefeller and Onassis with open awe, Getty was building something more enduring. A decentralized oil dynasty, stitched together not by charisma, but by control. By the 1970s, J. Paul Getty was the richest man on earth. But money, as he had always said, doesn't solve everything. On July 10, 1973, in Rome, his 16-year-old grandson, John Paul Getty III, was kidnapped by a group of masked men. They demanded $17 million in ransom. To most, this would have been a no-brainer, especially for a man worth billions. But Getty said no. He called it a scam. He believed the boy had staged his own kidnapping to extort money. Even as days turned to weeks, then months, Getty held firm. "I have 14 grandchildren," he told a reporter coldly. "If I pay 1 penny of ransom, I'll have 14 kidnapped grandchildren." As the world watched in disbelief, the kidnappers grew desperate and cruel. They mailed a lock of the boy's hair and a severed ear to an Italian newspaper, along with a final warning, "This is real. Pay up or he dies." Only then, under extreme pressure, did Getty agree to pay, but not the full amount. He negotiated the ransom down to $2.9 million, the maximum tax-deductible amount. He loaned the rest to his son, the boy's father, with interest. The boy was eventually released. Scarred, thin, broken. But Getty, he never visited him, never embraced him. When asked later, he said, "I have no intention of being blackmailed." The world was horrified. The image of the richest man alive, haggling over the price of a loved one's life, shattered whatever myth had been left. In that moment, Getty's name became something different, not just a symbol of wealth, but of its limits. The empire he built was vast, but its walls were cold. Its foundation, unshakable, but not unbreakable. For a man who spent his life chasing oil, J. Paul Getty's greatest monument wasn't made of steel or soaked in crude. It was carved in stone and filled with silence. In his later years, perhaps haunted by the criticism, perhaps simply driven by legacy, Getty turned his attention to art. Not parties, not politics, art. He began collecting it obsessively. Masterpieces, sculptures, rare manuscripts, Greek and Roman antiquities. He once said, "The beauty one can find in art is one of the deepest and truest pleasures available in this world." But true to form, even in beauty, Getty was strategic. He didn't just collect, he preserved. He curated. And in 1974, he opened the Getty Museum in Malibu, California, a stunning villa modeled after a first-century Roman country house. It wasn't built to impress the world. It was built to outlast it. Though Getty never stepped foot in the completed museum before his death, he left it his greatest gift, the bulk of his $700 million estate. That single donation made the Getty Museum the richest museum in the world, and one of the most influential. Through marble columns and timeless canvases, Getty finally said something softer than business, colder than wealth. He said, "Let this remain." In the quiet halls of that museum, his contradictions echo. The frugal billionaire, the ruthless negotiator, the father who held back, and the patron who gave everything. Because sometimes, the richest legacy is not what you keep. It's what you leave behind. By the time he died in 1976, J. Paul Getty was worth more than $6 billion, the equivalent of over $30 billion today. He had built the world's largest private oil company. He had left behind a museum that would shape culture for generations. He had lived in castles, crossed continents, and changed the way business was done. And yet, he died alone. In a quiet English manner. Watching reruns on a small television. No fanfare. No crowds. Just a man, and the echo of everything he'd built. To some, Getty was a genius, a man who saw opportunity where others saw risk. To others, he was cold, the billionaire who counted pennies and priced relationships. But maybe that's what made him unforgettable. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a villain. He was a man who made his choices, and paid for them in full. He once said, "Money is like manure. You have to spread it around or it smells." In the end, he spread some. He kept most. And the scent of his empire, bold, brilliant, bitter, still lingers. Because in a world obsessed with riches, Getty's life is a question we still wrestle with. How much is enough? And what does it cost to get there? J. Paul Getty mastered the art of making money, but struggled with the cost of keeping it. His story is a reminder. Wealth can build empires, fund museums, even shape the world. But it can also isolate, harden, and haunt. At Money Traps, we explore stories just like this, where fortune meets flaw, and financial genius collides with personal tragedy. So what do you think? Was Getty a visionary, or a cautionary tale? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one of them. Give the video a thumbs up if it made you think twice about what success really costs. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next true story of wealth, greed, and everything in between. And if this made your jaw drop, share it. Someone in your circle needs to hear it. This is Money Traps, true stories of financial greed, where fortune isn't always freedom, and legacy isn't always clean.